Okay, so hello everyone. Today we welcome our speaker, Dr. Lamichhane, the Associate Professor of Special Education at the University of Tsukuba, to talk to us about inequality in education and schools among people with disabilities. And throughout the panel discussion, I think it's important to ask yourself, how many times have I interacted with a disabled individual? And if your answer is a few times or none, I think it's important to think about why that may be and how our society has been structured. So to start off, I'm going to introduce Dr. Lamichane. So Dr. Kamal Lamichane is an associate professor in the Faculty of Human Sciences at the University of Tsukuba, Japan. He is also an affiliated researcher at the University of Tokyo. His fields of research are disability studies, economics of education, inclusive education, education policy and disability, and disaster risk reduction. His book, entitled Disability, Education, and Employment in Developing Countries from Charity to Investment, received the Japan Society for International Development Incentive Award in 2016. He was chosen as one of the 10 outstanding young persons of the world for 2018 in the category of academic leadership and accomplishment by the Junior Chamber International. Dr. Lamichhane earned his PhD from the University of Tokyo, and he's the first person with visual impairment from his home country, Nepal, to receive a doctorate. Due to his visual impairments, Dr. Lamichhane could not receive education until he turned 12. So now I'm going to give the spotlight to Dr. Lamichhane, who will share his ideas and findings on this topic. So I guess to start off, you can kind of briefly introduce why this topic is so important.
Thank you, Melissa, for the nice introduction. And also let me thank you for this opportunity to speak to the young people like you. I often, enjoy talking to the young people like you who are the real and the future change makers of the world, as we see that there are inequality persist in many fields. And one of them is in the field of disability. So in this today's talk, I like to, highlight 2 points, or I like to ask you 2 questions, like, why do you think you are getting education? And like, what kind of circumstances are making, harder for people to get education? These 2 questions. And on the top, I like to think about the concept of majority versus minority, and that would be related to disability. For many of you, I think if a person cannot see, hear, or cannot have a problem on his or her legs, maybe you would consider them as a disabled individual. At the same time, like, I like you to think differently. Are we are born equal, of course, but at the same time, we all as an individual have differences. And the point is, whether we are recognizing those individual differences or not is a key question to think about discrimination and disability and inequality. So most of us believe that when you have like eyes vision impairment, you are disabled. And the society, you forget about whether the society is accessible or not, whether your school is really accessible or not. Simply what you think is, if a person cannot get education in our school because of his or her vision impairment, that could be his or her individual problem, right? This is a traditionally rooted thinking in disability. So that thinking would, encourage you to think what is wrong and what is broken, and then you would try to fix it. I mean, if you have vision impaired people, you try to cure, but uh, definitely some problems cannot be, cured all the time. Then there, your policy absence, and you believe that that's their own problem. But there is another issue model these days. If actually the vision impairment is a disability, for example, I have a vision impairment, and now I'm talking to you via Zoom using my computer, and same computer I'm using, but I'm using screen reading software. If the software was not installed on my computer, definitely I would not be able to use this computer, right? So the point is, what makes people disabled? is a crucial question. Some people may believe that vision impairment or physical impairment could make people disabled, but that is not true all the time. Because if you accommodate the needs of people with different impairment groups, definitely they would be able to um, get education, they would be able to get employment, they would be able to enjoy all the things that you so-called. I mean, I'm sorry, not saying this to you, but to the majority. I mean, quote unquote so-called non-disabled people, right? So my understanding is that there is no one non-disabled in this world. Let me think. Let me ask you to think about majority. In my home country, Nepal, the ethnicity I belong to is in a dominating position. They are not in a minority position. So they are in a position to discriminate other groups. So on that particular environment, you are not the subject of discrimination for yourself because you are in a majority. So think about my position here in Japan as a foreigner, with a disability. So I'm definitely in a minority position here, and I'm the subject of possibly discrimination, right? So it is a relative concept where you are, and like what, like same question, like the white American people in so-called, like if they believe they are in a majority, and but if they go to other parts of the world where other ethnic groups are in a dominating position, they would be in a minority position, and they would be possibly the subject of discrimination by that majority ethnic groups. So it's a relative concept. So everywhere we have this kind of problems, and disability is not an exception. So if our infrastructure is accessible, people with disabilities could get education. So I have two things to say. In the world, there is the returns to the investment in education. We often say that means, like, if you get one additional year of schooling, what benefit you would get? The findings is that you would get 10% returns, higher returns by your additional year of schooling. And I did a research with my PhD supervisor, Professor Sawada in Tokyo. That research gave us the findings that if you give education to people with disabilities, they would earn 2 or 3 times higher income compared to their non-disabled counterparts. But the problem is whether we are providing them quality education with all, eliminating the barriers. So despite higher benefit of education, of course, economic benefit is just one of the many benefits. There are other, externalities attached. With all of those benefits cannot be measurable, but one of the benefits is economic, and those benefits are higher for disabled individuals. Despite these higher returns, the problem, however, is why those individuals still experience inequality in education, inequality in social inclusion, community participation. So there comes our thinking, our attitude. I often say to people that there is a poverty of awareness. That means, of course, when we say poverty, then it would be linked with financial poverty. So my belief is that financial poverty could be eliminated easily compared to poverty of awareness, which is like related to our attitudes and rooted in our mindset, right? That needs longer time, and that needs close contact with people with different individual differences, people with different abilities. So here, um, in Japan, like particularly when we talk about education, when we talk about infrastructure, they are relatively doing good. Their infrastructure is accessible even compared to United States. United States infrastructure is, one of the worst within the developed countries. They don't have that physical infrastructure accessible to people with disabilities. On the top, this is one infrastructure related issue. But if you think about attitudes, maybe they are relatively better than uh, Japan, because Japan has a homogeneous population if you forget about Ainu groups in Hokkaido, right? So here, diversity itself is a relatively a new phenomenon, which is not the case in United States because United States means like a multi-ethnic, a multi-diverse country. And same case happens to my home country. We have like 123 ethnic groups. So we believe like individual differences are natural. But here in Japan, that is not the case. But they are changing these days. Therefore, Japan's problem on disabled individuals is basically on whether people on acceptance, on recognizing the diversity. Diversity means differences, human diversity, the beauty of diversity, inclusion, right? Here, uh, I don't know how many of you have opportunity to communicate with people with disabilities. This is because you have here two I, ex, inclusive education system versus segregation. So they have here special schools throughout Japan, and they have mainstream schools. That means there are clear gaps between so-called non-disabled and disabled people, as both sides have fewer opportunities to meet. But does this system help? I think not, because ultimately we would like to work together after our education, right? So that means you have to be able to accept each other. You have to be able to understand each other. Same thing happens if you think of women, for example. As a woman, you have certain things that you are particularly, able to do, able to handle compared to male individuals. And same thing happens to individuals with disabilities. They are particularly good for particular things to do, but we don't recognize this. While looking, we feel, oh, this guy has that problem. That means they are different than ourselves. So they have to get everything differently. From that point, exclusion begins. And same thing happens to disability means no ethnic groups are exception on disability. In all groups, you have individuals with disabilities. And my point is, if you think disability is not like vision impairment, like functional limitations, we say, that means like your what is broken, what is wrong, like whether you are able to see, whether you are able to walk, whether you are able to hear. This is not, if you think this is not a disability, I don't think this is a disability, but I think if you fail to accommodate the needs of people with those functional difficulties, functional limitations, then the person actually becomes disabled. As I gave you example in the beginning of my talk, that if my computer had no screen reader, then I would not be able to talk to you. Is this because of my vision impairment or because of your failure to install a screen reader on my computer? This is a major question to think about. And at the same time, think about women. In we all talk about gender equality because women in general are discriminated against. But when you think of women gender equality, if you forget women with disabilities, then you would not get gender parity there, because women with disabilities may face dual discrimination, first as a woman and then as a woman with disabilities. Same happens. People of color. There are, when you think of discrimination, racial discrimination, and if you ignore like discrimination, disability based discrimination within racial discrimination, then people with black people with disabilities would be severely in a disadvantageous position, first as a black person, and then as a black person with a disability, right? This is the trend in the world. So in short, I was given 10 minutes, so if I'm exceeding, just stop me, Malaysia. But in short, while pointing out some of the barriers could be physical infrastructure being inaccessible, right? Your proximity from your home to your school. And there are two kind of barriers. One inside the classroom, another before reaching the classroom. So before getting opportunity to school. So in majority of the developing countries, you have problem in access to education. In the developed countries like Japan and United States, you have problem on quality of education, right? So when you have a disabled individual, you have to compromise while choosing the school. You are not able to send him or her in a school that you want. Like I, so this is, there's a gap exists. we are not yet ready to accommodate the learning needs of individuals with disabilities and other diverse groups. So these kind of barriers exist, and more or less we have common problems regardless of whether the countries are developed or developing, in relation to attitude, in relation to, for example, developed countries are doing better in physical infrastructures, and developing countries are probably doing better for relatively on and in a concept of acceptance. For example, I give you an example. In Nepal, which is one of the least developing countries, there majority of the educated individuals with vision impairments work as a teacher in mainstream schools. They teach students without disabilities in mainstream schools, the same subjects that so-called non-disabled teachers teach. So do you see those kind of inclusive practices being exercised in the developed countries like Japan and USA? I don't think. Here in Japan, majority of individuals with vision impairments work for massage and acupuncture sector job, which is promoted, protected, and promoted for them in an initial stage. So Japan has done better on infrastructure, making accessible, but they are far behind in terms of achieving inclusion. So therefore, the basic things we often talk about: diversity, equity, and inclusion. So inclusion means simply including or giving chance to participate. That's not the solution. So what is the solution is equity, because we all have differences and we all need kind of reasonable accommodations regardless of disability. So disabled individuals of course need that accept reasonable accommodations. For that we need the concept of equity to bridge the gap between people with and without disabilities. So one of the strategies to bridge the gap is inclusive education, which through which you know each other, and with you, if you ask people what do you feel while you meet disabled individuals, they may say, "Oh, wow, I'm scared. I don't know how to communicate to them." This is the basic questions I hear from my students. But the point is, if you were given opportunity to get education together, your such fear would disappear, because at the end, you all, regardless of individual differences, are the same human being. And therefore, if we think of interdependency to each other, we could make the world, we could make the society better. And with that, I think I should conclude here, and I would be very much happy to get your questions, especially as you will be our future. So you have to understand the concept of equity. You have to understand that we actually are interdependent to each other. And at the end, we all have limitations. And importantly, on the top, we have strength, which could diminish, which through which we can, overcome our deficits if we have.
Thank you so much. So yeah, now I'm going to be moving on to questions. And I think I kind of mentioned this when we called, but I wanted to ask, what are some actions that the government could take to create more equitable opportunities in education?
Malaysia, could you speak a little loud?
Oh yeah. So what actions should the government take to create more equitable opportunities in education for people with disabilities?
Number one, education is a fundamental rights. So government's actions should be inclusive from the beginning, right? Um, they have to consider people with disabilities as equal as other groups. And now we have clear evidences of benefit of education. So while they think of education, they think that maybe disabled individuals' education require more cost. So cost benefit issue often is discussed by economists, but at the end, the point is all of the individuals are the same citizens of the country, and they cannot overlook one group compared to others. So government's affirmative policies should be inclusive to there should be differences between developed and developed countries. In developing countries, still they have to think of access to education, because there are still several percentage of people not getting opportunity to go to school. So their priority should be providing access to education. And in developed countries like Japan, the point is they have to think of Japan's major problem, Japan actually has good education system for disabled individuals, but that is, segregated, or that is in a spatial settings. I, for the time being, certain years, certain grades, maybe special education system could be effective because as a learner with a different impairment groups, you have to learn certain skills, certain independent living skills, and that can be taught in special educational setting. But after mastering those skills, you should be able to get education in a same environment that your non-disabled colleagues are or friends are getting. So this is one issue. And for uh, if you make the classroom inclusive, then pedagogy, you have to do some kind of adjustments on your teaching styles. So for that, you need to give proper teacher training programs so that the teachers are equipped with skills and they could modify their pedagogy to meet the learning needs of individuals with diverse needs. So these are the basic things that the country can begin from.
Thank you. And then my next question is, so in your opinion, do you think, like, to what extent do you think special needs school and regular school should be integrated? Like, should they be fully integrated or only under certain circumstances they should be integrated?
Let me give you an example. I got education when I turned 12, and I learned those special skills. I mean, like as a visually impaired, like I had to learn braille, use of braille, right? Being able to walk from one place to another using white cane. Those skills are not taught in mainstream schools, right? So they have to be taught those skills in a special educational settings. After mastering those skills in a year, from the beginning, I got education in an integrated or inclusive environment. So, you know, in my class, I was only the student with a vision impairment in receiving education together. There were in total 151 students, and I was just one vision impaired student. So from that point, what I would like to say is it depends, depending on the severity of disability of the people, where to include, where to integrate, in which grade, from which grade to integrate. But so far, if they are able to master the special skills that they need to continue their education, from that point, they should be in getting education together. And this is equally beneficial for non-disabled students as well. Several researchers have concluded that if you have opportunity to learn together with non-disabled students, your academic outcomes will be higher. You achieve cognitive, I mean, non-cognitive skills. Like, education means not like being able to read and write. You have to solve the daily problem, right? Which non-cognitive skills, your behavior, how, and those things, leadership skills, your day-to-day, I mean, life requires certain skills that has to be received. And individual, when you are learning together, both sides have benefit to learn. And I have several researches, so due to time limits, maybe I'm not able to introduce those findings here. But the point is, it depends actually on the severity of disability. But the on more than that, what hinders us to integrate is not the disability, but our stereotyping perception on, you know, underestimating the ability of disabled individuals and creating the gaps. So if we can break that, then individuals with disabilities at least can learn together. And it should be there should be some, accommodations. So full inclusion means if you ignore the needs of we individuals, we all have our special needs regardless of disability, and that has to be taken care. And if same kind of strategy is taken to consider, I mean, to accommodate the needs of disabled individuals, they can get full education in a fully inclusive environment.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson, do you think we have time for another question or?
We do. We could do definitely one more. That'd be great.
Okay. I guess my next question is, how do you think non-disabled peers can take action to support disabled peers when you're together in school without excluding them or singling them?
Um, you know, uh, if we create a manual, like that doesn't help, from my understanding. If we make inclusion natural, then this question would disappear because you both know each other and you understand what they need and how you should help, right? But if we think how we can approach, we are asking this question because we are not getting inclusive education, right? We are not getting opportunity to mix up with them. Therefore, we have this wall behind between us. Like, I have my daughter. She's 3.5 years, and I have not mentioned her that I have a vision impairment, but she day to day she is living with me. So whenever I look for something, like if I try to find where is my sandal, she just go and bring those sandals to me. So she understands that this guy is looking for the sandal and he's not getting it. So she's helping me naturally, right? So inclusion, if you do from the beginning, um, you feel that uh, if somebody needs help, you offer, right? And that is vice versa, right? There could be the help that disabled individuals could offer you. So, but as an individual, who is not getting education in an inclusive education, what you can do is when you see individuals with disabilities, you should believe yourself that they are equal, same human being like you, and you can easily talk to them without any hesitation. Sometimes you offer your help, they say, no, I don't, because I can go by myself. That is not rude to you because um, sometimes though that particular individual did not require your help does not mean that other individuals will also not require. Not true. But for majority of us, if one disabled individual would behave in a way that you did not expect, you consider that that is the representative of all disabled individual. Not at all. So it is, like, simply you treat them as an individual, and you behave them in a normal way that you do with your other friends.
Thank you so much. So yeah, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today, and also a big thank you to Dr. Lamichhane for taking his time to share his thoughts and educate us on this topic of disability. So thank you so much.
Thank you for this opportunity. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to talk to you in future. And good luck with your studies.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Lamichhane, on behalf of ASIJ, for all of your wisdom around this topic. You've definitely given myself, and I know people on this call, much to consider about how we can support and become a more inclusive and equitable environment in school. And so I would love the opportunity to also hear from you again in the future. And so thank you so much. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.